Welcome to Life Stories, where we bring you powerful tales of transformation, resilience, and the human spirit. Today, we have a story that will leave you inspired and amazed. It's about a woman who was once dismissed as the coffee girl in her in-laws' family business, only to rise up and claim her rightful place as the CEO of a tech empire. With grit, determination, and a quiet strength, she changes the course of her life and the future of her company. So, sit back, relax, and let's begin today's story. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel to stay tuned for more inspiring tales. It was a crisp morning, the kind that gently reminds you of the passage of time. The sky above was clear, but inside the Caldwell family's grand meeting room, the atmosphere was thick with tension. I stood there, holding the coffee pot, my perfectly manicured nails curled around the handle. My wrist, adorned with a Cartier watch, peeked from beneath the silk cuff of my sleeve, almost as if I were trying to hide my true identity from the room. But in that moment, my role was simple: coffee girl. Or so they thought. At 32, I wasn't there to serve coffee out of obligation. I wasn't the dutiful daughter-in-law keeping up with some tradition. No, I was there because of Margaret, my ever-condescending mother-in-law, whose disdain for me knew no bounds. For years, I had played the role of the quiet, passive wife, the one who quietly accepted her place in the background. But beneath the surface, I was a force waiting to be acknowledged. "Be careful not to spill," Margaret sneered, adjusting her ill-fitting knockoff designer blazer as she glared at me. Her words were always laced with disdain, but I was used to it by now. It was as if every look, every comment, every action from her was designed to remind me of my place. "We wouldn't want you embarrassing the family more than you already do." A ripple of laughter spread through the room at her words, but I could feel Ethan's eyes on me, sharp and cold. My husband, the man who had been my partner for 5 years, sat there silently, as he always did. He had mastered the art of avoidance, the art of silent complicity, a tactic he had perfected over the years to avoid conflict. And I became the unfortunate victim of that silence. I continued to pour the coffee, my grip steady as I glanced at the faces around the room. There they were, my in-laws, discussing business matters as if they were experts in everything. But I knew the truth. I had the real power. I wasn't just a coffee girl, I was the silent CEO of one of the largest tech conglomerates in the country, and the company I ran, Apex Tech Solutions, had been quietly acquiring shares of the Caldwell family's failing business for months. I had been working in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to make my move. "Coffee, girl," Margaret's voice cut through the room. As usual, sharp and dismissive. "Our CEO is arriving any minute, and we need to appear professional." Her eyes flicked over me, clearly not knowing that the coffee girl she so despised was about to change everything for this family. I bit back a smirk, knowing exactly what was happening. The acquisition offer was not about negotiations. It was about sealing the fate of their company. It was about bringing justice to years of my own humiliation. Margaret could never have known the plans I had for her family's failing empire. The door swung open, and a familiar voice filled the air. "Apologies for the delay." Daniel Park, Apex Tech's public-facing CEO, stepped into the room. His gaze landed on me, and for a brief moment, confusion flickered across his face. He was accustomed to seeing me as the composed, powerful businesswoman in the boardroom, not the coffee girl in a family meeting. "Mrs. Caldwell," he began, but I quickly interrupted. "Just Lena," I said smoothly, watching Margaret's puzzled expression, clearly not understanding why Daniel was speaking to me so casually. "Cream and sugar?" Daniel asked, recovering quickly, his gaze lingering on me. But he said nothing further. "Black, please," I replied, watching Margaret practically shove me aside in her eager attempt to ingratiate herself with the CEO. "Mr. Park, it's an honor to have you here. Please ignore our daughter-in-law. She's just helping out since we couldn't get proper catering today." Daniel raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised. "Your daughter-in-law?" Margaret let out a dramatic sigh. "Unfortunately, yes. But let's get to business. Shall we? As she launched into her rehearsed monologue about their family legacy and market strength. I couldn't help but feel a twinge of amusement. She conveniently omitted the fact that their sales had been plummeting, their debts growing, and their impending bankruptcy looming. Margaret's words were empty, and I could see that Daniel wasn't entirely buying into her facade. I glanced down at my phone. A message from Daniel. Play along. You'll understand soon. I smiled to myself, knowing this was the moment everything would change. My company, Apex Tech, had been quietly buying up their shares for months. They had no idea. Margaret's voice cut through my thoughts. Well, we've received your offer, although, honestly, it's lower than we anticipated. I could feel the tension building in the room, but I didn't let it faze me. I calmly took my seat in the corner, tapping out a quick text to Daniel. The real numbers are here, in case you need them. As the meeting continued, I could feel the walls closing in on them. This wasn't just a business meeting, it was a reckoning. The meeting dragged on, with Margaret speaking endlessly about their proud family legacy and how they expected exponential growth once Ethan took over as CEO. I knew the truth. Margaret's delusion about the future was nothing more than a veil, hiding the collapse of a once thriving business. Ethan sat there, silent as always, nodding along like a puppet on a string, too afraid to speak out against his mother's ambitions. I checked my phone once again. Daniel was ready to move forward. And everything was in place for the next step. I stood up, gathering my things as if I had somewhere else to be. I need to step out, I said calmly, my voice cutting through the conversation. Margaret scoffed. Typical, no respect for family matters. This is why we're keeping the business within the real family. She turned to Daniel, eager to shift the conversation. Mr. Park, we should discuss our next steps with the company. I gave her a polite smile and shook my head, ready to drop the act that had been forced upon me for years. Actually, I said, my voice calm but commanding, I have a board meeting to attend. Daniel, I'll see you there. The words landed with the weight of a bomb. The room went silent. I could hear a collective breath being held as I casually dropped the bombshell. Madam CEO, Daniel said with a grin, his voice carrying an edge of amusement. Of course, Madam CEO. Margaret's glass slipped from her hand, crashing to the floor in a spray of glass. And I could see the shock spread across her face. Ethan, too, looked pale, his mouth agape. Lena, what is going on? He stammered, the color draining from his face as he looked between me and Daniel. I adjusted my Chanel jacket. Standing tall, this moment had been 5 years in the making. And it was finally here. Perhaps, I said coolly, we should clarify who is acquiring whom. Nova Tech Industries, my company, currently owns 48% of your business. Today's offer is for the remaining 52%. The silence in the room was deafening. I could almost feel the confusion and disbelief radiating from both Margaret and Ethan. They had no idea. For months, my company had been slowly purchasing stock in their failing business. They were blindsided by the sheer audacity of it all. And I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction as their world began to crumble. That's impossible, Margaret finally managed to say, her voice trembling with disbelief. We would have known about this. I slid a folder onto the table, the documents inside neatly organized. Would you? I suppose you didn't notice the shell companies buying up your stock or the real reason your biggest contracts were cancelled last quarter? I locked eyes with her. Everything is documented right here. Ethan was beside himself, his desperation evident in the way he grabbed at the papers, as though trying to deny what was right in front of him. You've been spying on us? Your own family? I chuckled softly. No, Ethan, I conducted due diligence. Something you might have noticed if you'd actually read the reports I gave you last year. But you chose to believe your mother when she claimed I was meddling in family business. Margaret's hands trembled as she skimmed through the documents, her face contorting with disbelief. These numbers, they can't be right. Daniel nodded, confirming the truth of the matter. Mrs. Caldwell has been thorough. Everything checks out. He shot me a quick, supportive glance. For the first time, I saw the cracks in Margaret's facade. And I knew I had won. All those years of being treated as an outsider, a mere accessory in the family, had led to this moment. The woman who thought she could belittle me, who dismissed my contributions, was now facing the consequences of her arrogance. I glanced over at Ethan. "You were too busy scheming to keep me in my place," I said, my voice cutting through the tension. "While you were plotting against me, I was learning everything about your company. It wasn't difficult. Your weaknesses were glaring." Ethan's voice wavered. "We'll fight this. Our lawyers." "Your lawyers?" I interrupted him, my smile sharp. "They work for the board, not your family. And as of today, the board works for me." Margaret collapsed into her chair, the reality of it all sinking in. Her eyes flicked between me and the documents, and I could see the realization dawning on her. It was over. The game was up. I had won. And now it was time for the real work to begin. The room fell into stunned silence as the weight of my words settled over the family. I could see the shock in their eyes. The realization that everything they had assumed about me was wrong. All these years of being looked down upon, treated as an outsider, were now coming to an end. I had done what I set out to do. Expose the truth and reclaim the respect I had long been denied. Margaret, her face twisted in disbelief, remained seated, unable to muster a response. Ethan, too, seemed paralyzed by the turn of events. He had always been the obedient son, too afraid to stand up to his mother, too passive to challenge the status quo. But today, the walls he had so carefully built around his life were crumbling. And all he could do was stammer. The silence stretched on until Daniel cleared his throat, breaking the tension. "Well, now that everything is out in the open, perhaps we can move forward and discuss the next steps," he said, his voice calm and measured. I nodded, my mind already focused on the future. The moment of victory was satisfying, but I knew the real work had just begun. I turned to Margaret, my voice steady. "You asked why I didn't tell you sooner. The truth is, would you have believed me? Or would you have pushed Ethan to divorce me and marry someone more suitable?" I let the words hang in the air, knowing that they struck at the heart of everything that had been wrong with this family dynamic. Margaret opened her mouth to protest, but I wasn't interested in hearing her excuses. "We were never family, Margaret. I was the outsider, tolerated only because Ethan refused to marry your friend's daughter. I was the coffee girl you could humiliate to make yourself feel better about your own insecurities." The words felt liberating, like a weight being lifted off my shoulders. For so long, I had played the role of the quiet, obedient wife, but in reality, I had been the one holding the cards all along. It wasn't about revenge, it was about justice. I had worked tirelessly to turn around a company that was on the brink of collapse. And now it was time to secure that future. "I didn't take anything from you," I continued. "I rescued it. Your company was 3 months from bankruptcy. The employees you claimed to care about were about to lose their jobs. And I did what needed to be done." Ethan's face grew pale, his hands trembling as he clutched at the papers in front of him. "We won't let this happen," he said, his voice shaking. "We'll fight you with everything we have." I looked at him, my eyes cold. "You can try, Ethan, but the truth is, you chose to sit by silently while your mother belittled me. You chose to ignore the reality of the business and trust in her misguided vision. Now, you'll have to live with the consequences." I turned on my heel, ready to leave. "The divorce will be final next week, by the way. I've already taken the liberty of moving my things out of the house. I'm not interested in your personal assets. I have a company to run." I could hear Ethan's voice calling after me, but I didn't turn back. It was over. My heels clicked sharply against the marble floor as I stepped into the elevator, the sound echoing in the empty space. The reflection in the mirrored walls of the elevator reminded me of everything I had become, the woman who had been underestimated, the woman who had turned the tables and was now in control of her own destiny. As I stepped out of the elevator, the first wave of press reporters was already gathering in the lobby. They had heard the news, and they were waiting to hear the story from me. It was time for the world to know the truth. I walked toward the boardroom, my confidence unwavering. The reporters snapped pictures, eager for any tidbit of information. I knew they were curious about the coffee girl, who had suddenly become the CEO. Let them talk. Let them tell the story of how the family had underestimated me. But more importantly, let them witness the transformation I had set in motion. By the time I reached the boardroom, Daniel was waiting for me. Brilliantly played, boss, he said with a grin. The board's ready when you are. I nodded, the fire of determination burning in my chest. This was just the beginning. Today wasn't just about exposing the lies of my in-laws. It was about creating a future where the company would thrive. And its employees would be treated with the respect they deserved. As I entered the room, ready to take charge, I couldn't help but smile. It had been a long road to get here. But it had been worth every moment. Success was the sweetest revenge of all. And I was just getting started. A year after the takeover, everything had changed. Apex Tech had transformed beyond recognition. Thanks to the restructuring plan I had implemented, the company had not only survived, it had thrived. Employee satisfaction was at an all-time high. Production efficiency had increased by 30% in the first month alone. And the stock price had doubled. The family business that once seemed invincible was now a shell of what it used to be. While I had turned mine into a powerful, innovative leader in the tech industry. But the real transformation wasn't just in the numbers or the company's success. It was in me, the woman who had once been silenced by the weight of family expectations, belittled by her in-laws, and trapped in a marriage built on passivity, had found her voice. I was no longer the coffee girl. I was a CEO. I was a force to be reckoned with. The press conference I held to announce the company's future vision was met with a standing ovation. As I spoke about sustainable practices, digital innovation, and job security, I knew that I had finally earned the respect I deserved, not just from the board or the press, but from myself. And when the press asked about the future role of my in-laws in the company, I simply smiled and answered diplomatically. All personnel decisions will be made based on merit and qualifications. As for Ethan, I'd moved on. His attempt to claim a position that wasn't his. His failure to see the bigger picture, it was all behind me now. He had made his choice. And I had made mine. And as for Margaret, she would have to live with the consequences of her actions. The truth was out, and I had built my empire from the ground up. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more life-changing stories. Stay tuned for more inspiration, resilience, and empowerment in our upcoming videos.